Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Cohen, and
Good morning.
Good morning.
the Topeka City Councilman, and this is the Social Service Grants Committee, Tuesday, July 16th at 9 a.m. at the Law Enforcement Center. I'll call this meeting to order, and the first item up is to approve the minutes from the June 5th meeting. Entertain a motion.
And move to approve.
I'll second. Those in approval, vote yes?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Next item up is to review the 2020 recommendations, and Councilman Padilla, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I want to thank everybody for coming to this meeting and listening to what we have to say. But we also want to hear what you have to say. So anybody in attendance right now at this meeting, I've asked the chair if we can entertain that opportunity for people to make comment before we move forward in the body of the meeting. So if there's anyone that wishes to come forward and speak on this topic, just raise your hand, or we'll have them start to come up. Mrs. Christina Alcala.
Stand, or do I go up?
You can come up to the podium, please. That way we have your microphone.
I didn't know that there was going to be a possibility of speaking, but I'm thankful for that opportunity. I'm Christina Valdivia Alcala, and I am from District 2. As I'm looking this over, I see that there have been some what appears to be adjustments from another spreadsheets that I was looking at before, but I just want to say this. I think that no matter what kind of problems there were with filling out these grants, or whatever the appeal process was like or challenges that came through, with that, I think it is unconscionable that we were looking at several weeks ago the funding possibly being cut by the city for these social services. I think that when we talk quality of life, we mean quality of life for everyone and not cutting out the knees from underneath senior citizens. And there was a lot of posturing going on at City Council about how hard it was for these decisions to be made. It was so painful. It was the most painful thing to cut services. But you know what? The most pain that people are feeling are the senior citizens. The senior citizens that need transportation to get to these senior centers. The part-time employees that may be impacted. I'm surprised this did not make the media. I mean, it just really makes you wonder what you're talking about as a city when we are talking about quality of life, and that senior centers in specific districts would attempt to be cut like this. I appreciate everything that you've done, Mike. I really do, because I think without you being on here, we wouldn't have seen any changes. And not being an expert, I admit, in reading spreadsheets, I'm assuming that there's going to be some funding done. It probably is not enough. But I really think that we have to get some priorities straight when we're talking about quality of life, because quality of life means for all people. And I also wonder how many of I think Councilman Lesser is missing, how many people have been to visit these particular senior centers and talked with the seniors and seen how much they have done during the course of the years that they have been in existence, and how much their funding has been cut over time. But you want to nickel and dime them for not having particular forms filled out, when what we should be doing is working together as a community, both city officials and both the community organizations that we are talking about. I appreciate you giving me the time to speak.
Thank you. Would anyone else care to address the committee? Mrs. Stubblefield?
Good morning. I appreciate your time. I come to you as a private citizen.
I'm sorry, for
You sir?
protocol, just identify yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Michelle Stubblefield, Michelle Cuevas Stubblefield. I am part of District 1. I come to you today as a private citizen. I also come to you today as a lifelong Topeka. One thing I have always been very proud of in this community is how we take care of our youngest and our seniors. I think that's truly a reflection of the type of community that we are when we acknowledge that we have people in the community that need to be cared for. Okay? One thing I can tell you about as being a public citizen and being heavily involved in the community is that this has always been a very private and public partnership, and that needs to be maintained. I also served as a state director for LULAC, and I can tell you in LULAC Seniors Citizens case, this is a one-of-a-kind for the U.S. There is no other LULAC Senior Center that has received the acknowledgement because of the services that they provide in a manner that's efficient, that is open to the entire community. Yes, it started as a neighborhood community in Oakland, but since that time, it has been supported by two primary organizations who have continued to this day to raise funds. Now, obviously, as any nonprofit, the funds aren't enough. Okay, and that's where that public-private partnership comes into play. We need you as a organization, as a government, to come in and continue to provide those services. It's a quality of life issue. It's a quality of place issue. When people come into this community and decide where they want to live, they're going to look and see how we treat our most vulnerable. I would ask that in a day where seniors are living longer, we need to provide them a quality of life. This is also an economic issue. If we are all living longer and adult daycare, if that's what you want to call it, is more readily needed, it's costly, but it's extremely valuable. So I would ask you, please consider the monies that you provide are extremely important. I think we've seen in most senior centers that are also used wisely, and the partnerships that are created is just simply a representation of the kind of community that we are and we should be. And money, unfortunately, is a reflection of that commitment. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Anyone else wishes to address the committee?
Yeah, Mr. Bell, my name is Norbert Dahme. Everybody call me Blue. But I just want to follow what they were saying about senior citizens and that. I'm a senior citizen now. But, you know, it's sad that we keep on cutting on these senior citizens like me, especially those low income, and they keep on cutting programs and that. We worked all our life, we pay our taxes and everything like that, but yet they keep on cutting. And I think that's really it's unfair that we work all our lives, pay taxes and all that, and yet they keep on cutting on our funds for senior citizens, LULAC and all that. But I just want to say, I hope you guys get together and start looking into this about taking care of our senior citizens and that. That's about all I can say, but just please think about the senior citizens and LULAC and everybody. But we need them programs, and some people ain't got no transportation, stuff like that, so please think about it, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to address the committee? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Kay Gray, and I represent the board for Pappins Landing Senior Center. And I hadn't planned on speaking, but I appreciate the opportunity to ask for support for Pappins Landing Senior Center. It has been in existence, and we hope it will be able to continue. The questions came up at the council meeting: how much of the budget will you be missing if you get no funding from the city? And in Pappins' case, they would get about over 12% would be cut. So we would be cutting personnel and activities, and in addition to that, The center is now in the hands of Pappins Landing Senior Center, but if it closes because of not enough funding, it will revert back to the city. It is kind of a strange deal, but that building would revert back to the city, and we are spending money on maintenance. We have to replace a furnace and air conditioner, several $1,000s for that, and other repairs. So we are taking care of a building that the city will get if we close, and we hope we don't close. So we're hoping the city will continue to fund all the senior centers because they're all very important for this city, and the seniors depend on those centers for their activities and their communication with each other instead of staying in their homes and not being able to be out in the public, and this is a safe place for them to go. So please consider funding all the senior centers in Topeka. They're very important, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else care to address the committee? Okay. Well, thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. Visiting a little bit with with Director Hahn, I wanted to ask if she would describe for us in layman's terms, for me to be able to understand every little bit of it, what the role of the review volunteer committee plays and what they look at, and what is their responsibility in assigning scores to the applicants.
Sure. So maybe 2 years ago in our social service grant committee process, the committee adopted a policy to recruit volunteers from the community to sit on a review committee of the applications, and they actually score a bulk of the applications. The city staff does have a few of the areas on the score sheet that we are responsible for scoring, and that's the portions about past performance related to timely reports. We provided the score for the board composition and whether or not it meets the 65%. Oh, I'm sorry, the committee does that one. Outcomes. The outcomes is the other area that staff scores, and the rest of the application is actually scored by this committee. We developed not a job description really, but just kind of a guideline that the committee set forth last year, I believe, to describe what we're looking for. And the folks that we recruit each year for this process are folks that are involved in grant making, that have been professionally involved in grant making throughout their careers. So this year there was a committee of 3 volunteers. And that's about what we average because we're asking folks to give us approximately 40 hours of their time to review all of the applications and score them. And they score them individually and then come together and create a cumulative score. So of all of the questions on the application that are scored, staff has 2 that we provide the scores for. And that, again, that is based on the history of their reporting and the outcomes that they tell us that they're going to achieve, and then how they report on their accomplishments. So in a nutshell, that's how that works.
Okay. And I want to refer back to a document that I have in front of me that it's the City of Topeka Social Services funding priorities for year 2020. And the mission statement is quality, cost-effective social services to handle our vulnerable citizens with care, minimize victimization and crime, minimize turnovers in neighborhood, and optimize success. All things that I would agree with, obviously. And the very top bullet point is senior citizen neighborhood-based programming to include meals, activities, and transportation. If in fact that is a priority for our city, I would assume that's shared with those volunteer?
This, the RFP, this sheet that you're reading is included in the RFP, and they are
Okay.
given that RFP as part of the process each year. So yes, sir, they are familiar with the priorities as set forth by the city of Topeka.
So when it came to the city of Topeka from the volunteers, their review and cumulative scores, okay? Those programs that they were reviewing, had they come to a ranking already as to somebody got 10%, 20%, 30%? I mean, did they have a list of ranking already before the staff then looked at the outcomes and the report submissions?
So if I understand your question, you're asking if we provide the scoring that staff does to them along with the applications and turn them loose, or do we not tell them our scores until after they provide their scores? Is that your question?
The latter,
Yes. No, they're provided our scores on the front side, yes.
Okay.
So we receive the applications, we score our 2 questions, and then we provide them with all of that information.
Okay. Corey, can I ask a question? Is there a process that involves a meeting, I guess, with those reviewers to get a explanation as to how they came to those numbers?
Yes, there is. A few meetings back, we had the appeal process where we went over why everybody lost points. So at the end of the scoring process, the reviewers come to a consensus on why somebody lost points, and I do have those with me today for each of the different categories.
Okay, so,
And the agent, if I may.
Yes.
On the priority sheet, all of the applicants met the priority, so that's kind of the threshold guideline. So if they are not on one of the priorities, then we wouldn't be scoring them, but all of these agencies met the priorities for the city.
okay. And as I understand it, the minimum score to receive consideration for funding is 90?
It was 90, yes, this year.
What was it in the previous year?
I believe last year it was 88, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
It's 88, but what we do is the score, that score changes from year to year because it depends on when we run out of money. And so if we run out at 88, we run out at 88. This year it happened to be a score of 90.
okay. All right. Is there a way to, I don't know, explain or at least get some idea of why the senior centers, and I'm not excluding the Latino Family Development Program, but primarily the senior centers, because that seems like a clump, a group of social services, how they seem to be most affected by this current round of applications?
There's really no explanation. It just ended up that the scores fell that way. So it wasn't, we weren't looking solely at the senior centers and targeting senior centers by any means. It was just the scores fell that way, and it happened to be that all 4 were in that situation.
And I don't mean to imply that that occurred at all, but it just seems to me to be more than coincidental. Maybe it's as a matter of the process itself, that somehow those groups struggled with meeting the required outcome score that put them in a position not to receive funds. So I'm not implying at all that,
Okay.
but it seems to be a commonality that is shared with them that would occur that to happen just with those senior centers. Is there something that,
So I'm looking at
Glares out?
the spreadsheet, which we have comments on, and I'm not seeing a common theme. Each agency missed points in kind of different areas. It wasn't one particular area that they all lost points in. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, so Yeah, I don't see a common theme. I mean, some of them lost points on their outputs being clear. Some on organizational leadership. But nothing consistently with all 4 of them.
And of the 4, how often, I mean, if 90 is being the threshold, how many of them fell out of that threshold within, say, 2 to 3 points?
Well, they received an 88, so they were 2 points shy of the funding.
So all 4 of those were 2 points shy of that 90?
Yes.
And would it be fair to say that those loss of points came in positions where they are administrative with regards to the reporting piece, or what?
No, the one she just mentioned being the outputs were clear, that's scored by the committee.
Yeah.
And that's referencing the outputs that they include on their application.
Okay.
So no, they're not all losing points in the 2 areas that staff scores, if that's what you're
Okay.
asking.
Well, it sounds like that, but what I'm trying to get to is, again, the commonality that they all share in getting no funding seems maybe indicative of the process itself, maybe an understanding of how to report what they are doing in a way that's effective for their organizations. Because from firsthand, I know that these senior centers already pretty much run on a shoestring as it is, and their directors wear many hats and don't have the luxury, most of them that I understand, I would say all of them, to have somebody on staff who's good at writing their grant application. Because I look at somebody like the Boys and Girls Club, and believe me, I'm wholly supportive of that, but they're very efficient, obviously, in writing their grants. They have somebody that is doing a very good job of presenting their case so that they can receive the requests that they've submitted. But they're not the only ones. But I know these senior centers are pressed for doing a lot with very few staff, if any. And so I wonder how much of the process is difficult for them, and if the process, excuse me, somebody in Lake Mary, Florida. I'm just wondering if the process has overtaken the purpose of this whole grants committee.
So just to give you an idea of some of the things that we do to help support the agencies in their applications, because definitely you could go through the list of folks that apply and find agencies, not just senior centers, but other agencies as well that are very small staffed, and in some cases volunteers are a bulk of their staff. But maybe it would be helpful if we just quickly go over the areas where the 4 agencies that you're talking about lost points. So
Okay.
that maybe will answer your question. So Latino Family, Community Action Latino Family Development lost. They received a 15 on outcomes from prior grants. There's 20 points possible for that. That is one area that staff scores. For organizational leadership, they received 3 points. There are 5 points possible there. And that speaks to the percentage of the board that is represented by minorities. For past grant administration, they lost 5 points. They received 5 points, and there are 10 points total. That is an area where staff scores. And that has to deal with their timeliness and accuracy of their reports.
And so between 10 and 5, there's no different number that you can choose, like 6, 7, 8. If they miss,
No.
timeliness is 1 time or 2 times. does it increase in penalty, as it were, but it just goes from 10 to 5, 5 to 0?
Corey?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
There you go. Okay, sorry, really should have my readers on. East Topeka Council of Aging, they received 8 out of 10 for outputs being clear, 8 out of 10 possible for outcomes being clear. Outcomes identified in their plan, they received 3 of 5. And past grant administration, they received 5 of 10. LULAC Senior Center, for outputs being clear, they received 8 out of 10 points possible. For outcomes from prior grants, they received 15 out of 20 possible. And for past grant administration, they received 5 out of 10 possible. Pappins Landing Senior Center received 10 out of a total possible 20 for outcomes from prior grants. They received 3 of 5 possible for organizational leadership. I missed it. No, that's it. And those are the 4 that you're considering.
And those are areas that staff on the outcomes piece would have scored, or is that the committee?
Yeah, so the outcomes from prior grants is scored by staff. However, what staff does with that particular question is take their final report and compare it to what they said they were going to do. And so it's really if they did it or they didn't do it, and then they got their score based off of that.
And if they did, which is say that we were going to serve 150 people, but we served 145, they fall short of that outcome.
Correct.
And so then there's a reduction in the point.
Yes.
Okay.
And one point of clarification on that part of the process. So once the grants are awarded and the agencies know the total dollar amount, because in my experience, they've never gotten as much as they asked for because we don't have enough, then they have the opportunity at the contract phase of the grant process to adjust their outcomes that they say that they will provide to the city. So if their funding was reduced from what they anticipated, they can at that point make an adjustment to be mindful of that fact that Corey just pointed out, that at the end, we're going to measure again, and if you missed it, you will lose points. So there's a safety mechanism, so to speak, in that step of the process.
And they fully understand that safety, that opportunity for them to make the adjustment so that, and is there a timeline that they have to meet to get that correction made in order to maybe affect the outcome?
Rochelle sends out the contract, and at that time in the emails, she allows them to revise their outputs and outcomes according to the dollar amount that they received that particular year.
And if there are errors in their readjustment, does Rochelle help them or point that out to them at that time?
Yeah, sure.
And is that done in what time of the year? First
Quarterly.
quarterly?
Every quarter.
Every quarter? Okay.
So they can adjust it. And after that, it's locked in.
Okay.
Councilman
And
Padilla.
actually, sorry, Rochelle just pointed out one other little piece of information that will be useful to you. She's saying that in that first quarter, they're given the opportunity to adjust it. So when they turn in their numbers, at the end of the first quarter, they're given the opportunity to adjust those outcome totals one last time before it's locked.
Okay.
So they're, yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Councilman Padilla, do you think the system's flawed?
I think from the first meeting that we had, an observation was made by myself and shared by Councilman Lesser at that time, that there were points in the process that could be reviewed to see if they would be necessary changes. And he felt, and he stated, I don't want to misquote, that some weighting may need to be looked at. So I think the system may not be totally flawed, but I do think the system bears review, and I don't want it to appear that I'm criticizing the system that's been put in place, but I don't think that we've gotten to the point where we've got it perfect yet. And I know that there are other groups that do it, and the city took it back to take on this responsibility. So I think it was important for us to discuss this at a level beyond just a consent agenda item, so that we could actually look at making some changes. And if, again, not to overspeak Councilman Lesser, he's probably watching at home right now saying I should have showed up. But I think he did suggest that somewhere down later on in the year, we would ask you as chair to bring the committee together with parties that are involved to review the process, to make suggestions, and then go from there. But he didn't want to change the process for this year. So that was his expression to me anyway. And if I can make the statement that I know it appears that my advocacy is for just these 4 groups. In the beginning, my advocacy was that if we have a pot of money, in this case $434,000, that there should be the ability for everyone, if we all say that all these met our priorities, our social services funding priorities, if they all met that threshold initially, that they should have some consideration in the sharing of that total pot of money. It just seems to me to be unequal to give as much as we are, has been recommended to some groups at the expense of others. And I asked Director Hahn on a supposition, if the 4 groups that I had asked to be funded at a level of a minimum of $10,000, which I know is the minimum threshold, how it would adjust and how it would play out. And she submitted what that would look like. And for me, it looks like even in making an adjustment to be able to fit in at a minimum of $10,000 for the 4 that I've requested, that those other grantees, while they would be reduced in their funding, would still be getting more than they did in 2019. Is that not correct? 2019 allocation, let's say, would have been, let's say, well, let me look at one, the Big Brothers Big Sisters mentoring. In 2019, the allocation was $18,200. Is that correct?
Yes, the very next one is an example of, so.
And the request for next year is $25,000. Then at my request, well, not at my request, the committee recommended $22,500.
That was
the original.
based on their score, yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
And then at my request, you looked at what could be shared and revised the award to $20,048, which is a difference of $2,400.
Yes.
So still, at $22,500, the recommended would still be more than they got in 2019, which was $18,200.
So the revised total is $20,048, which would be more, yes, than their 19 allocation of $18,200. But if you go to the very next agency on the spreadsheet, you'll see where that it doesn't play out that way. So in 2019, Boys and Girls Club Comprehensive Youth Development was awarded $23,250. The recommendation from your committee for 2020 funding was $22,750. The adjusted total with the 40,000 cumulative taken out is $20,271. That is a $2,400
$79 difference.
reduction from
Reduction.
the 19 funding amount.
From the, yeah, but it's still,
So it doesn't, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Some of the agencies, it plays out that way, that yes, they still will receive more than what they were awarded for this current funding year for 2019, but it doesn't play that way for all of them. Corey just added up 13 of the recommended agencies that would have a reduction from their 2019 funding totals of 19
Yeah.
total.
in our conversation, you mentioned that there were two or,
There are still two that, so the original recommendation, there were 6 that didn't meet the 90% threshold. The 4 agencies that we've been discussing, Sole Reason and Midland Care Hospice Services. Both, you pointed out correctly that both Midland Care Hospice Services and Sole Reason, those are new programs for the 2020 funding cycle. These are new applications for new programs. But those 2 still remain in an unfunded recommendation status, even based on this conversation.
Would their applications have fallen in that 88% whatever threshold
Yes,
that we were talking
one-
about earlier?
Those 2 applications were the lowest scoring applications.
So they would have been outside of 80.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, again, I know the focus has come to the 4 organizations that I have brought up, and I go back to my original intent, and that is that if there's a certain pot of money that we have and limited resources is understood, that there needs to be, in my opinion, a way through the process or by council recommendation or that everybody gets a share of that total resource. And the minimum share that has been recommended previously has been $10,000. And that's what the $10,000 I've asked for the 3 senior centers and the Latino family development. Now, if you're saying that that still leaves Midland Care and Sole Reason out,
According to, okay, so the dollars ran out at 90% this year. There were 6 originally, so the 4 that you're kind of setting on the side here, that leaves those 2, Sole Reason and Midland Care Hospice. Sole Reason received 49 of 70 points total for a 70%, and Midland Hospice Care received 59 out of 70 points possible for an 84. So those are they are below the 88, and all 4 that are currently being discussed
I see.
are.
I see. And is that probably because they're a new applicant, or is there some other reason that they were so low? With no history?
No, because they have no history, their score is weighted. So instead of 100 points possible, they have 70 points
Okay.
possible because we're not counting against them for a history that they don't have.
Okay. Well, I am still of the hope that we can come to a point where the request that I have asked for in the amount of $40,000 for the 4 programs could be made a part of a recommendation to the committee as a whole. And I guess I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, if that's a direction that we can give, or if that's,
So essentially what we need to do is we need to increase the budget $40,000 somehow.
well, yes and no. What I'm seeing is that we take what we have, not increase the 40,000, and share and split the share of what we have already. Increasing the budget might seem even more of a daunting task, and so I'd like to be able to stay within that 434, but split the sharing of that amount to be able to give those 4 agencies a minimum of $10,000 as participants.
I'd say that if we're changing the rules, I think I'd like to advocate for the 2 that didn't get any money. And if that's, if we all have to share it, then we all have to share it. And the thing is, though, that's not the way the process was. This is why we're doing what we're doing, is we have a process so that we trust whatever comes out of the end.
The committee has the ability to change the policy that was established for this RFP for this year. But you have to vote, and it has to be, today would have to be 2-0. You can't move forward with anything new other than the prior recommendation from this committee, which was to take the original recommendation based on their scores to the full body, to the governing body. So those are your options. You can change your process. The staff won't recommend that. I think that does not send clear messages to the community and to the applicants that are involved in this process and at the mercy of this process. But you have the ability to make that change, absolutely. But you'll have to have 2 votes for it today, or if you had a full body, you would have to have 2 of the 3 voting for that.
And the other option then, as you said, is that we vote today on the original recommendation to be sent back?
So the only way to change the original recommendation basically is to override it with a vote for something different. So you have to, because there are only 2 of you here today, you will have to vote together to make any changes to this original recommendation. Because that was the last time you had a vote on action on this.
Mr. City Manager?
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Explaining it well. Yeah. That's correct. I don't know if I'm doing the best job verbalizing it, but that's accurate.
Are you following this conversation, sir?
Yes.
I'm sure very intently about how it would come back to the council as a voting item on either the consent agenda, or would it be
Well, it would be an action item.
an action item?
But as it was before, so it would go back as an action item, but reference the decisions regarding voting. Yes, you need a 2-0 if you want to do something different. You both have to agree what it would be. So if you want to fund the other organizations and change the process of, because basically what you're doing is you're lowering the threshold of what you would accept. I mean, through the process, the funding ran out at 90%, so then that was 90% was where we established the guideline as to who would be funded, and that's what staff brought forward as a recommendation based on where the money came out. And so you would be saying, really, you're lowering your threshold to 88 as being the amount, and that would force everyone else to have a reduction in what they would receive from what was originally proposed for them, based on the spreadsheet that she provided. So,
And as the chair asked, failing that because I don't know that that would occur today, that it could come to the council as an amendment to the budget?
Well, it could, well, in this case, if you were to approve the additional 4, that wouldn't be an amendment other than it would include the other 4 agencies and change the whole table, reference what everyone would receive. It wouldn't change the number that we set aside for social service grants in the budget, but it would change it would be an amendment to what was originally proposed because those 4 would be included. And so you would have basically a new amendment that includes funding of those 4 organizations, but not an amendment to the budget in that sense.
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't know. I think I think we're almost at a stalemate.
I think if we change the rules, we should be fair to everybody. And if this, if we were changing the rules, and what I would recommend is that the 2 organizations that we grandfather in, we don't change that. We add everybody, your 4 and the extra 2. Split it all up evenly with the rest of the everybody gets the same amount of pie, in other words.
Well, I'm agreeable to that, and my advocacy has been that.
How does that change and are there any
That
comments of
would
anybody that wants to talk about that?
Completely, we would throw this away, and instead of it being based on scores, if I understood what you said correctly, we would take the total number of applicants and divide the money available by that number, and everybody would get that dollar amount. So your RFP and your process leading up to that, just
Gone.
we're throwing all of that
Yep,
away.
that's-
Yes.
It would, really, by doing that, you're taking it from being a competitive process where those that are high performers get recognized for being high performers and basically making a participatory application. So if you have a program that meets the funding guidelines as to what we'll fund, everybody gets money if they apply. And I think that's honestly a dangerous step for you to go down to because you'll have another 15 applications next year, everybody expecting to be funded. If that's what you determine when you go into next year as being your funding mechanism. And so I'd be very careful with making that decision. I understand lowering the threshold to the 88 because that's where it was before. I understand the mentality of that if these are good programs, why aren't we funding them? And that is understandable, and I've explained that to you in our conversations. That is changing the focus a bit as we go forward with how we use this money.
Well, based on your comments, you said something there that, and I agree with you that I don't necessarily want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and go down a road that could be a slippery road.
Yeah.
But your comment was that if maybe we change that threshold from 90 to 88, would that accomplish the same thing and still keep the process in place?
Well, yes, it would be the same process. What you end up doing, though, is lowering the threshold. Instead of saying that those, based on the recommendations for amounts, get down to 90 and you're out of money, you're saying we're going to lower that amount to 88 to include those other organizations,
Okay.
and at a minimum funding level of 10,000, even though they asked for more. And then we did basically what would be, that's represented by the chart that you were provided.
So is that essentially doing the same thing as kind of throwing the process out and?
It is, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Yes. it
And
is.
I'm not.
I mean, it's not opening it completely, but it's kind of like opening the can and
Yeah.
saying, yeah, we'll let these 4 sneak in and because we've lowered the threshold to 88. And it is hard from the standpoint of the 88 threshold is just this much off of the 90 threshold. But also, I think we've got to be careful, too, is that sometimes, with the money that we provide, it's an allotment of money that allows those organizations that we are funding to have the funds they need to operate. They'll all typically, if we change this formula, I would think that all of those that were receiving a certain amount of money prior will probably need to change their outcomes. So we're going to dilute the outcomes that could be received by or achieved by those organizations that have received additional money. Now, that's not a given, but it is a possibility that they'll have less money to be able to do what they said they were going to do, and they may need to look at adjusting their outcomes if we were to give this additional $40,000 to the other 4 organizations. Now, obviously, you have the reverse impact on those 4 organizations that don't receive any funding. It's going to make it very difficult for them to meet their typical outcomes that they have for their organization, and that's why they're wanting to see the additional funding received.
Thank you. That is helpful. I don't want to go through an exercise of futility and make a motion that I know probably won't fly, which is the 2 of us here, and probably wouldn't fly otherwise anyway. And go to what I believe maybe is another way of offering an amendment, as other council have done or intend to do during this budget process. And dependent upon the number of amendments we have, hope that through those yays or nays, we're able to find an additional amount of money that could be shared by these organizations.
Right. Yeah, I think that in a lot of ways that's potentially our best option because it represents and continues to represent the fact that those that met the threshold that was established and were successful in their application are still recognized in receiving the funding that was available based on the scoring system.
So for today's vote, as Director Sean was pointing out, would be to vote to submit the original and send it to the council.
Yes.
And then, for my part, to, if not just for the 4 that I've advocated for, to include the other 2 as well, and ask for an amendment in the budget process in hopes that, depending upon what amendments are approved or disapproved, we may find some funding there to allow some sharing of that resource for these programs.
Right. And also, even if you did not do another motion today, and it's really not necessary from the standpoint, if there was not a motion to change the original motion, as Director Hahn was saying, the original motion would go back. And the report from the committee chair would be that no other motion was approved to change what was originally recommended. So I'm back here to present our original recommendation for consideration. So it's really not necessary that you take a vote now. If there's not a vote to change it, you would simply report back that our original recommendation is what we're asking you to consider.
Okay. Thank you, Brent. So, Mr. Chair,
How would you like to proceed?
I think as the city manager has explained, that if we don't make a vote today, then it goes back as the original recommendation, and then my efforts will be along the lines of making an amendment to the budget process in hopes that we'll be able to find the monies there and be able to fund the programs through either up or down votes on other amendments that may come before the body as a whole. So, as the chair, I think that recommendation by the city manager to report back that no change was recommended would probably be our most practical way to move forward.
So are you making a motion to adjourn the meeting, to send the item back?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.